Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to today's class. This is the course on Phenomenology and Social Research organized by the Consciousness Studies program by the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. So this course is designed by Dr. Sangeeta Menon, Head of Consciousness Studies and Dean of Humanities, and also Dr. Saurabh Tadaria, who is the instructor for this program. So I will just briefly introduce Saurabh sir just once more because some people are attending the class for the first time today. So Saurabh Tadaria holds an MPhil and PhD from Center for Philosophy, JNU. He has also worked with Asim Premji Foundation, Delhi University and ICPR as a postdoctoral fellow. He is currently exploring the intersections between phenomenology and Kashmiri Shaivism in Nias. His recent publication is Synthesis and Transcendental Ego in Kant and Husserl, which is published in JICPR by Springer. So very warm welcome to you, sir. Before sir begins, I just wanted to say that the lecture will go on for about 1 hour. And after that, we'll be taking questions. So all the questions that you have, please feel free to put it up in the chat box. And then we'll take it after the session ends. So yeah, so you can begin.
Thank you. Thank you, Meera, for the introduction. And I welcome you all for this second lecture of our course. And before starting this lecture, I just would like to explain what we are doing in this particular class. So first, what I would like to confess that this would not deal with the each and every aspect of the Husserl, because Edmund Husserl himself was a very great philosopher and he written extensively. So is it impossible to cover all of his aspects in a single class? Second, this class is also not an exegesis on Husserl's text actually, which requires altogether different setting and different kind of enterprise. So what we are basically doing in this class, we are dealing with the basic problems of phenomenology, basic concept of Husserl, and we will try to situate it in the context of the social research, that how the Husserl's notion of phenomenology and his various concepts would help us to understand our being in the world and the problematics of social research. So for this, again, like the earlier classes, I have made PPT. So there are the so I would request Niharika Sharma, our doctoral scholar, to share the PPT. Yeah, may I request you, Niharika? Yeah. So first of all, let us start with a very simple and everyday experience, that how do we experience the world? This is all of us, we experience the world in the regular, predictable way. The world is something which appears to us structured. So the fact that we are able to predict anything in the world and to like formulate our plan of action in the world, because the world is structured and we can predict the world. We know that that at the 4 o'clock we will open our laptop, zoom in, and then we expect the lecture would come, given if all the technical settings are there. We don't we don't expect that when we will open the laptop and that the frog will jump out of the screen. That is not the case. So why this happen? Because we have the basic fundamental trust on the world, that we trust the world. On the basis of our trust in the world, we plan our actions. Now, the question is that what is the reason behind this trust on the world? Why the world is so trusting? Well, one thing might be that people can take resort to the naive realism that, okay, because the world is out there, the things are out there. So that is why we are experiencing the world. But there is the problem of skepticism, because many of the times sense deludes us. There is the moments of hallucination. There are other kinds of the sensory inputs which we cannot trust. So we cannot go the whole hog with the senses and say, okay, this is senses or our sensations or the perception only, which will ground the experience. Then what would be the ground of the experience? So this is what has bothered the philosophers, because philosophers always thought of giving the knowledge on the secure foundation, that there should be the fundamental ground to the knowledge. There is a which cannot be doubted. So only on that ground, the edifice of the knowledge or any metaphysical theories can be made. So philosophers look for that foundation. So in modern philosophy, as we discussed in the last class, Descartes come up with a cogito argument. And why we are interested in Descartes? It is not because of the historical reason. That is because of the particular method of Descartes, which is called as the method of doubt, which shows the spirit of the modern philosophy. So he doesn't come up with any kind of theological or kind of theological baggage or kind of any kind of the textual baggage. He just simply come up with the method. He says that suppose what is the guarantee that what I am experiencing is true. Suppose if so he does a thought experiment and he says that suppose if there is a demon and he is kind of deluding us. We are kind of like, he is kind of deluding us. He has, by some magic trick, he has led us to believe what is actually not the case. So some of you which might have seen the movie Matrix must have find this echoes of Descartes there, where the person who knew the person who the people who are experiencing the world is actually they are actually this was the illusions produced by the machine. So he says that I cannot trust my senses because there is every possibility is that sense might be deluding me. So I cannot trust my knowledge, which is guaranteed by the sensor. Then what I can trust? He says I can doubt anything, but I cannot doubt that I am doubting. So what does it, so this means that I can act anything which the thinking, I can doubt on anything, but I cannot doubt that I am doubting, because that would be a self-contradiction. Hence, there, so he comes up with the famous this dictum that I think, therefore I am. So what does it mean? That existence is guaranteed by the thinking. I can trust my existence because I am thinking. So thinking is essential to the existence. So we are not discussing here Descartes in the full-fledged manner or the merits or demerits of Descartes' philosophy, but what we are interested in the methodology of Descartes, that how he come up with the cogito argument that you doubt on everything, and through that you come up with the secure and the solid foundation. So with this we will move to Edmund Husserl. Can I request Niharika to turn the page? Yeah. So Husserl's phenomenology should be understood in the background of the Descartes' method. And Husserl himself was much influenced by Descartes' methodology. In fact, one of his famous book, Cartesian Meditation, is based on the Descartes' method. So he asked, so he gives us the method of suspension. What he says, let us, so this is Husserl's method. He says, let us doubt everything, what we are experiencing in the world, let us suspend it. It doesn't ask us to deny it, that it is actually not existing. Rather, it asks us to suspend it. For the time moment, don't believe that it is existing or not existing. Let us suspend it. Whatever we are experiencing in the world, like the chair, table, car, tree, other people, let us suspend their existence. For the time moment, don't believe that he is such and such, don't predicate it. Then what will remain? He said, when we will suspend our belief in the world, what remains is the consciousness. We will now, from the realm of the external world, we now move to the realm of consciousness, realm of object to the realm of consciousness. So when we analyze our consciousness, we will always the consciousness of something. That consciousness always remains word directed. Either it will think about some external object, like chair, car, tree, etc., other person, or it remain directed about some inner feelings like the pain, pleasure, happiness, sadness. But consciousness always remain directed towards some object. So this is aboutness, this characteristic of consciousness to point beyond itself, it is called as the characteristic of, this is the aboutness feature of consciousness. This is of course given by the Brentano earlier. So Husserl called this as the intentionality. That this feature, that consciousness has the essential feature of intentionality. So he calls that how do we come to this feature of intentionality? He gives he calls it he gives the method of the eidetic variation. What is the eidetic variation? Eidetic variation, eidetic has come from the Greek word eidos, which means the essence. That what is done actually, you think of some object and you just think what is the essential characteristic of it, or what are the accidental feature of it. Then you just imaginatively replaces the accidental with the accidental with the essential feature. For example, if somebody asks us what is the definition book, what is the book essentially? So is this what constitutes the book? So in the eidetic variation, you see, okay, it is the pages of the paper which constitutes the book. Then you say, okay, no, there is like ebooks also, which doesn't have the pages, right? Which doesn't have the papers. So it can, so it is also a book. Then what constitutes the book? Like this, you just replaces the non-essential things and come to the essence of something. What is the essentially define the particular object? Hence, when he uses this in the context of the consciousness, he says this is the intentionality, which is the essential feature of consciousness. If we have to think about the consciousness, it will always have the intentionality. Even all of you people, just a moment, close your eyes and feel, you will find your consciousness always directed towards something either external in the world, to the speaker or to the something about your mental experience, finding the lecture boring or non-clear or the good or bad, whatever. But consciousness will always remain word directed. Hence, phenomenological method differs from the scientific empirical approach toward the consciousness. So it is not a kind of a scientific empirical approach toward the consciousness. Like a neuroscientist would look the connection, analyze the consciousness through the brain, that what part of the brain, what neurons are fired when the consciousness emerges. So phenomenology is not this method, because this is the third person objective approach toward the consciousness. It approaches the consciousness as it is experienced, how the consciousness is experienced. So first thing is that as we have come to the realm of the consciousness, the consciousness has this nature of the intentionality. Another feature of the consciousness is that we have the experience. There is a certainty of the experience. Whenever I'm experiencing, I know that this is my experience. This would be a self-contradiction to say that I am not experiencing this thing. This experience is not mine. Whenever there is a kind of the experience, this definitely belongs to me. So this is called by Husserl as the first person experiential account. That whenever there is a kind of a experience of the consciousness, there is a kind of the feeling of subjectivity, that I'm experiencing that. This subjective phenomenal experience is called by phenomenologists as what it's like to be. There is something like to be whenever we are. If we are experiencing a red apple, there is something like to be to experience a red apple as it differs from the yellow sunflower, or like experiencing some other person, or experiencing like the pain. So there is a different feeling. So there is something like it to be experienced. This is famous philosopher David Chalmers has called as the heart problem of consciousness. About that, it is easy, he differentiates between the easy problem of the consciousness with the hard problem of consciousness. What are the easy problem of the consciousness? The easy problem of consciousness are like, you have to see that how the brain is like, which neuron is fired when particular kind of the response occur. What are the causal relationship between the consciousness, a certain part of the brain. But there is a hard problem of consciousness. This hard problem of the consciousness is what is the subjective experience? Because it is entirely subjective, so it cannot be experienced objectively. It cannot be determined in terms of the physical properties. So this is actually, this is called as the hard problem of the consciousness, or the problem of qualia, first person perspective. So some of the, so this is also like, there is a famous thought experiment which is called the Mary's experiment. This is an interesting experiment when it is called that, suppose Mary is a scientist, and but all her life she remained in a black and white room. She never has gone outside. She remained, all her connection with the work, with the outside world is through a screen, which is again black and white. But she is a genius scientist and she knows everything about the brain. That whenever anybody sees the red surface or the red color, what kind of the impact response is produced on the surface of the eye, what kind of the response the brain, which neuron is find. So what is the wavelength of the red color, everything, whatever the properties which could be associated with the red color, she knows each and everything. Now one day she comes out of the room and actually encounter the red color. Before she has never seen the red color. Now the problem is, does she experience something new? Yes, she has experienced something new, because there is something like to feel the red color. But her knowledge is not increased, because whatever the knowledge about the red color she already has. So this we so can we say that she doesn't have any new knowledge? No, there is a new knowledge, because this is something like to experience something. So there is a subjective element is also necessary with the experience. So this subjective experience is what phenomenology calls as first person perspective. There is also interesting zombie argument. Suppose if there is a person who doesn't have these kind of subjective experiences. So these people would like be a zombie. So these zombies are like, they are not experiencing anything new. They are, so they are actually able to like reproduce, they actually able to imitate every kind of the emotion with the humans have. They can respond in the perfect way as the human does, but they don't have any inner life. So that is why we cannot befriend a zombie, because the zombie can imitate respond to our each and every experiences, but at the same time we know that they are not experiencing anything. Because they are not experiencing anything, so we assume that they are not able to empathize with us. Yeah. Can you turn the page, Niharika? So in the last slide, we have seen that we have discussed about the phenomenological method, in which the thing was that you suspend your everyday natural attitude, the natural belief on the world, you come back to the realm of the consciousness. And when you come back to the consciousness, we notice this feature that consciousness has this property of intentionality, of aboutness in the world. And at the same time, we also have the experience of the subjectivity, that it is my experience. So this is the first person perspective is also associated with consciousness. And the phenomenological approach to the consciousness is from the experiential point of view. It is not like a theoretical or the third person point of view. So this Husserl calls this structure of the consciousness, Husserl calls as the transcendental subjectivity. And he is interested in that what are the features, what are the characteristics of this subjectivity which actually structures our experience. So for him, mind is not like a mirror which only like reflects the object. There is a kind of a structuring, interpretation or activities involved on the part of the subjectivity. So this we can understand, and some of you people must have seen when you have gone through the readings of Lyford. So this is the famous Jack Ross duck rabbit picture, made famous by Wittgenstein in philosophical investigation. So if you see this picture, you will find that you will notice that from the one angle, from the one side, it is looking like a it is looking a duck. But if we see from the another side, so it will appear like a rabbit. So it is like a duck rabbit picture. Now the person who has never seen a rabbit in his life, or in his world there is no rabbit, so he will always interpret this picture as a duck, and vice versa. So this means our background plays a definite, very important role in interpreting the things. So perception is not a simple reception of information, rather it involves an interpretation. So this means that perception, whenever we perceive anything, it is not like we are passively receiving the information. It involves the interpretation on the part of the subject. And how it happens? So in order to understand this, we have to understand the relationship of subjectivity or transcendental subjectivity with the time. Husserl says that all our experiences are temporally structured. All our experiences are structured in the time. So he explains it in his famous work, which is called the Lecture Concerning Internal Time Consciousness, which is one of the most, in fact, the most difficult work. So he problematized the notion of the time, that time is like a time. He says time is not like a time is not like a simple moments, actually, like isolated moments which are connected. He says time is like a stretch in which the past, present, and future remains intertwined with each other. He explains it through the example of the melody. He says, suppose if somebody is listening to the melody, so it is not that whenever he is listening to the next note, he already had the remembrance of the earlier note, which is called as the retention of the earlier note, and on the basis of it, he anticipates the next note. So this is he called as the time consciousness, internal time consciousness. The time, so time is not a single isolated now. It is like a stretch, which you can see in this figure, past, present, and future. In this, what happens whenever we are interacting with anything, we already have the retention of the past moment, and on the basis of it, we predict the future. For example, whenever we open our laptop, so we know that we are anticipating the screen will come in that, because we have already had the remembrance of that bygone moment, because every time we open the laptop, we always find the screen. Hence, our consciousness always like anticipate. That is what in the last class, when I was discussing about the surprises, that surprise or horror, all these things will come. This happens because we are expecting, because we expect the word in a particular way. When it happens, when when it happens to be otherwise, then it causes surprise or shock to us. So some of you which have seen this movie, Memento, which has been also made in Tamil and Hindi as Ghajini. So there was an actor who was constantly forgetting. He had to take the revenge, but the problem was that he was actually forgetting everything. So he had to write in his body in order to remember. So what does it show? This means if the past is disrupted, the future is also disrupted. If we don't have the memory of the past, then we cannot engage with the future also, because it is the future which it is the past perspective past only which gives us the perspective toward the future. In fact, we cannot perceive the change, because all of us, we see the change. Whenever we talk about the change, what is the change? Change is something we change from time t1 to time t2. The bird which was sitting on the branch, now it has flown to the flown in the sky. So this is change from t1 time to t2. But suppose if our consciousness remains imprisoned in the small time capsule, it cannot have the retention of the time t1, and it remain only fixed in the present in the t2. Then what will happen? It will not able to perceive the change. For in order to perceive the change, we must have the retention of the earlier moment. So what does it mean? So it means to say that Consciousness is not something which, consciousness is something which is always structuring the world on the basis of the past experiences, and on the basis of this past experience it anticipates the future. Next slide. Priyanka, next slide. Yeah. So now we come to the question of issue of the life work. Now, interesting, which Husserl discussed in his work Crisis of the European Sciences. Now, interesting thing is that, like some of the things which I experience in my lifetime, like whatever the experiences I have in my lifetime, I am having. So these experiences actually help me to anticipate the things, anticipate the word in a particular way. But there is also we also live in an intersubjective community. There are the people around us. How do their experiences also shapes our consciousness? So this is the second phase of the Husserl, which is called as the passive genesis or the genetic phenomenology, in which he was interested that how consciousness itself is, how this transcendental ego or transcendental subjectivity itself get constituted by the intersubjectivity, by the many kind of the experience, not only of mine but also of the community, of the others' experience. How does it shape my perception? How does it shape my consciousness? Now the question is that how these experiences get sedimented to the transcendental ego. That or transcendental ego, when we are using the transcendental ego, this means the self only. That how the experience get sedimented to this self. Now, one way of the thinking is that, okay, these experiences, this is just like how do we learn to ride the bicycle? That first of all, we consciously learn to ride the bicycle. Gradually, it become like it has gone into my subconscious, and I learned that behavior. So this is the is this the way that we have these experiences got sedimented to the transcendental consciousness? So according to the no, that is not the. This is also true, but this doesn't exhaust all this sedimentation process. So this we can understand one interesting example, which is given by Sartre, that suppose someone is reading a storybook and he is totally engaged in reading that story. Now he was all absorbed in that storybook, and suddenly someone asked him what you are doing. Then he immediately responded, I am reading the story. Now the catch is that when he was reading this story, he was not conscious that I am reading the story. He was reading the story. Then does it happen? Then somebody asked him. Then he reflect on the experience. Oh, what I was doing, and I was reading the book, and then he come to the conclusion. Does he respond in that way? No, that is not the possible. Then how does it respond that I was reading the book? This means Husserl say that our consciousness is always, there is a tacit awareness which is called as the pre-reflective self. That there is a pre-reflective self, a pre-reflective consciousness which remains aware all the time. So even if I am talking, giving this lecture, but at the same time, there is a awareness that I am sitting also in a chair. There is the person who is sitting by my side. This is the daytime. All these are actually the part of the consciousness. Of course, the spotlight is on the lecture, but all these are from the background of my consciousness. So they are in the consciousness pre-reflectively experiences all this. So so all these pre-reflective experience get sedimented to the ego. So Husserl calls is that intersubjectivity, like the people with whom I interact in this social world, my body, social experiences, all these constitute the self, the background of the self, and gives us the horizon of anticipation and experiences. So on the background of my embodiment, intersubjectivity, social experience, this constitutes the self. This gives us the horizon. How do we experience the thing? For example, if I have to catch the auto, so and auto is running very fast, I don't jump out of my window and catch the auto, because I know that this is not the this is not the possibility which my body is offering to me. I will firstly go by the staircases and then try to catch it up. So our consciousness already on the basis of the past experiences, it anticipates or it orients its action in the world in a particular way. So this is Husserl called as the background experiences, which form the life world. So this can be shown by the Husserl interestingly explain this background experiences on the basis of the simple act of the perception. Like for example, if I am seeing a car, so how the perception of the car takes place? Normally we say, okay, car is taking place because I am seeing the car and there is a kind of the representation of the car in my mind and I will able to identify it with the general image of the car. Okay, this is the car. But Husserl problematizes this and Husserl says when we see the car, we see only the front sides of the car. So how can we say that there is a but there are some background profiles of the car which is not into my perception because I cannot see in the one perception. So how I can say that this is the car? So do I go round about the car, add up all the perception, all this profiles of the car and then come up with the say, okay, this is the car. This also not happen that way. So Husserl says, actually, whenever we perceive anything, so we co-intend, we also intend the horizon because I know that if I turn around, then I will see the car in that way. So in any perception, I don't see the whole of the object, but on the basis of my embodiment, I know if I turn around that way, I would be able to see the car in that particular way. Hence, the perception is not something which is only I see, but it is also I can. So Husserl moves around this theory of the I see to I can, that the perceptual grasp of the thing is based on our embodied possibilities, in our embodied capacities. So I know that if I move around the car or if I move around any object, I will grasp the car in the particular way. That is why the surprise is possible. Suppose if I go around the car and I find the car empty, it is like damage from the backside, then I will be surprised. I will say, oh, I thought it is a car, full car there, but it's actually half car is only there. So that is what Husserl say, that our this background experience provides a horizon. We see the things in the open horizon. This is the horizon of the experience. We don't see the thing completely, but in a horizon of the embodied possibility, in the horizon of the other things, we perceive the objects. So that is what we mean when we say that perception is required the interpretation. Interpretation here means that on the basis of the background experiences, on the basis of our previous experiences, we anticipate the objects in the particular way. Hence, the perception shows, according to phenomenology, our embodied, our being in the world, our involvement in the world. So Husserl, this background, Husserl says that is the life world. This is the general background of our intersubjectivity, embodiment, all the social experiences, experience of the time consciousness that gets sedimented and that form the horizon on the basis of which we experience the world. So Husserl says that this is that all the thematization or formalization originates in the life world. He gives the example of the geometry. He drives home this point through the example of geometry. He says that how geometry in the first place has come into place. He says, first of all, people were involved in the pragmatic needs of measuring the things for their practical needs. And gradually, so house has to be a house. We require the things like the houses to stay, the places to inhabit, and other kind of the practical necessities. And gradually that they got formalized. So this all the formalization, mathematization occurred from this practical background of the life world. So we have forgotten this life word and we think, okay, this geometry or this formalization is the fundamental thing. So if you know, the formalization is also has the background of the life word. So he says it is the source of all experiences, theoretical or pre-theoretical. So any theoretical involvement with the word like mathematical, geometrical, or the science has a background in the life word. It is the life word only that we have come on. For example, any kind of the scientific object, first of all, it was an object to be used. This was an instrument to be used in the practical purposes. Later on, when we have to, later on, it has become the object of reflection or the theoretization. So life word is the background of that. Any kind of the practical activity, like for example, if like for example, if somebody asks you that what you expect in the class when you come to the class, so people say, okay, we are expecting that there should be a teacher in the class, there should be the proper sitting arrangement in the class, text, whiteboard, all these things, but nobody expects the floor. Nobody says that there should be the floor in the class, but yet the floor is the part of the classroom. What does it mean to say? This means that this is already in the background of our experience. We anticipate and expect the thing in the particular way. Hence, it becomes the part of our subjectivity. Hence, the phenomenological word is meaningful. We come back to the from where we have started, that the phenomenological word is the meaningful. We understand the word in a meaningful way. This is a word is not like a chaos. It is not like a Alice in the Wonderland. For us, the word is the meaningful. We engage with the word in the particular and the systematic way. And this is possible because there is a structure on the basis of which our subjectivity operates. And this subjectivity, Husserl calls as, which we had discussed in the classroom, is Husserl comes through the method of phenomenological method, through the suspension. He comes to that this is the consciousness, and this consciousness has the structure of the intentionality, first person perspective, and it has and this structure works in the time consciousness. It always anticipates the things on the basis of the previous experiences. So I would like to end off with this quote of Husserl, which he writes in, which he says in Crisis of the European Sciences, that from the beginning, the phenomenologists live in the paradox of having to look upon the obvious as questionable. The universal obviousness of the being of the word, for him, the greatest of all enigmas. So that is what Husserl wants to say, that phenomenologist lives in the paradox, because what remains looks at the obvious, like the experience in the word, that the word is in this way. He just want to see that why this is so obvious. What are the background structure which help us to understand the word in the particular way. That is why the simple thing evokes wonder in phenomenology. So that is what, so this is why Husserl's notion of phenomenology, of the wonder about the everyday experiences, help us to understand that phenomenology not only that phenomenology deals with every kind of the experience in a unique way. There is the difference between the feeling envy, feeling hate, feeling anger, feeling happiness. There is some aboutness, something unique to that. So phenomenology just involves how that is the lived, how this uniqueness is involved, and how the subjectivity operates toward this experience in the particular way. So this is basically what I have in the mind when we are for Husserl class, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Saurabh sir, for that excellent class. Now we will take certain questions. We have a couple of them in the chat box, and if any of you have more questions, please put them down in the chat box and we'll be taking them. So the first question is from Victor Banerjee. Are you here? Victor Banerjee?
I'm trying to unmute him.
Okay, so I'll just read the question. How is intersubjectivity embodied under genetic phenomenology, in which the intertwining of social experience and conscious acts are different from existentialism?
Okay. So the question is that the how intersubjectivity embodied under genetic phenomenology in with the intertwining of social experience and conscious acts are different from existentialism. Well, I found difficulty in following this question, that what is actually mean by this. So is Victor Banerjee around? Can he say what he has in the mind?
Sir, I'm trying to. Okay, he's unmuted now.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Actually, I just got confused with this overall essence of intersubjectivity with existentialism, because more or less existentialism also talks about the social experiences and how we make our own conscious choice and act. So if you can actually differentiate between the two, so it will actually unclear my doubt in that.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah. First of all, this is the interesting thing that phenomenology is not existentialism per se. So many phenomenologists like Sartre, Heidegger doesn't call himself as an existentialist, though in the many like the philosophic book, he is called as an existentialist. Sartre calls himself as an existentialism, and he used the phenomenological method. Now, what is the fundamental of the existentialism? As you know, that it says the essence presets, the existence presets essence. That before there is a essence, there is a existence. First of all, I am there. Then anything essence comes, like of the social experiences, whatever kind of the identity which is ascribed to me. But I am something which comes prior to that. So phenomenology, what phenomenology, especially Husserl phenomenology, says, in that way it can be converged with the existentialism, because it also says let us suspend. It doesn't deny the word. It says first of all, like with a proper method, you come back what you can be sure of. So you can only be the sure of the I am, your existence. That is why Sartre was influenced by Husserl. But where they part their ways, while Sartre says this existence, I am, is also always remain haunted by the nothingness, because there is a nothingness in the consciousness. That is why it can never be satisfied. It can never become a full project. While Husserl's sole interest was in because he was to analyze the component of this intersubjectivity. For him, the problem was that we are experiencing the word in the structured and the proper manner. So what are the background structure? So in order to understand this background structure, he started with the transcendental ego, but gradually in his later phase in the genetic phenomenology, he shifted towards the intersubjectivity, or what he called as the life word. I hope that makes sense to you.
Okay, thank you, sir. We will now take Kaula Chakor's question. What is the difference? Kaula, are you here? Okay. So I'll just read the question. What is the difference between mere subjectivity and transcendental? And could you possibly re-explain the concept of internal time consciousness?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I know these are the problematic areas.
Am I making myself audible now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, please. I would like just to know the difference between, transcendental subjectivity and mere subjectivity, because I see that the concept of transcendence or transcendental is repeated in, in Husserl's article, and I would like to know what does it mean here when we say, for instance, transcendental ego or transcendental subjectivity. And thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So first of all, like we have to differentiate between, like I come to your question with the second part of your question. In Husserl, there is a use of the transcendence and the transcendental. So what is the difference between the transcendent and transcendental? In Husserl, it simply means transcendence means when the consciousness reach out to the world. For example, if I am seeing an object or like a laptop, so this means my consciousness transcendence. This is the transcendence of consciousness to the object outside, right? Now, what is the transcendental subjectivity? Transcendental subjectivity we have to experience, we have to understand in the transcendental tradition of Kant. As Kant says, that transcendental is the condition of possibilities. What are the fundamental structures which make any kind of the experience possible? So Husserl says that when he uses the transcendental subjectivity or transcendental ego, he is talking about that fundamental structure which are necessary for an experience to take place. Subjectivity or like the subjectivity is not like the empirical self, which now whenever in the philosophy of mind we are using the subjectivity, so we mostly mean this transcendental subjectivity or the formal self only. But there is of course transcendental self, then there is the empirical self which is like Saurabh, the person who is talking, who has particular kind of the narrative and the story about it. But according to Husserl, there is some formal kind of the background, formal structure, which actually help me to engage in this world. So, I think second part of your question is that you want me to explain the internal time consciousness, isn't it? Yeah. So internal time consciousness, when Husserl actually, earlier Husserl was more in the mode of the Kantian, so to say. He was only thinking that there is a consciousness and it is experiencing the world. But later on, he said that this transcendental subjectivity act in the mode of the time consciousness. That whatever our orientation and engagement with the world, they are always in the horizon of the time. So whenever we experience anything, we already have the retention of the earlier thing. For example, if I am answering your question, I should be the retention of the earlier moment, what you have said. So this should be the retention in my mind, and on the basis of which you are also anticipating what kind of the answer I would get. So this horizon of the retention and the protension, which is another name of the anticipation, is kind of a framework in which the consciousness or like the act of the consciousness moves. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir. We'll take the next question. Syed has a question. Nuzat M. Syed, are you here? Happens to consciousness and spiritual experience, which can be interpreted subjectively. Can it be explained generically?
Okay. So Nuzat, the thing is that the thing is that this is first of all not in the scope of phenomenology, because the thing is that suppose in the spiritual experiences, what kind of the spiritual experiences they are, because there are some of course use of like Vipassana practices or many tantric practices, interpretation of it in the way of phenomenological interpretation of that, because in Vipassana practices you experience your body, your breathing, and on the basis of it you have kind of a subjective authority of that you explain the things in a particular way. So that is true that because the consciousness is like mostly described from the subjective kind of the experiences. So in the spiritual practices, there can be, for example, like a Sufi music, there can be a subjective dimension where you can come up with kind of your explanation of that. So, so that can be possible. But again, the problem is that for me is that any kind of the spiritual experiences when it uses the language. So language is intersubjective. So how do you like bridge the gap between the subjectivity and this using this intersubjective language? So that is a tough nut to crack. We can discuss about it later.
Okay. We'll take the next question. Akash Guglani has it. What would be Husserl's theory of metacognition? Is he first order consciousness theorist or higher order theorist? What does respond to semantic externalists who believe that mental content is determined by external
External physical factors.
Yeah,
so like this, this is actually denied by the phenomenologists, because this physicalist or the materialist is actually cannot be exhausted. This Mary's experiment, Mary's red experience, that cemented that okay, the semantics externalism, there is a externalism is there, and the semantics of any experience can be explained totally in the physical property. But there is also the experience of the qualia. There is the phenomenological experience of the qualia. So that cannot be defined, that cannot be semantically explained, right? So that is why this is the hard problem of the consciousness. I don't think that phenomenology would totally go all the way with the semantic externals. For him, with the semantic externalism, there is also a phenomenal or the component of the qualia, which has to be accounted actually. And is this the first order theorist or the higher order theorist? First order consciousness theorist or the higher order theorist? Yeah, for him, this is the first order consciousness theory because he is not interested in the behaviors actually which the consciousness generate, but what is the consciousness per se. So this is kind of the meta theory of the consciousness he would like to propose. So cognition for him is a broad term which of course would involve not only the perceptual act but also the embodiment, intersubjectivity and all that.
Uh, we have Ishu Saxena asking you to elaborate on embodiment.
Yeah, so embodiment is something very interesting which we'll discuss in more detail in Merleau-Ponty. But Husserl's take on the embodiment is very interesting. For example, so again to repeat the example. So when we say, actually when we are perceiving a car or some object for that matter, so we are only perceiving the front side of it. We don't see the background of it, the back profile of the car. Now, whenever we see it full. We don't go around the car and then say, okay, I perceived a car fully. It has a background. We don't check it. So Husserl says this is because we have a body. We have what he used as a kinesthetic ability, because our body has this feature which is called the kinesthetic ability, that we know that if we move around, then this perception, this profile of the this background profile of the car would be available to us. So this is in the background of our consciousness that enable us to perceive, to have the perceptual grasp of the thing. Even for a child, if you give a ball, he never see the ball all around then grasp it. He will grasp it in a hole. He will just grasp it. So why? Because this is already, there is a trust on the word, and this is according to Husserl, this trust on the word is because of our kinesthetic ability, because we can move about and grasp the things. So this Husserl called it the ability of I can. Yeah.
Snehal has a question. Maybe she might want to streamline it a little bit. She's asking you to elaborate on the structure of experience. Snehal?
Yeah.
Wait, Lisa, Snehal.
Yeah.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sir, yeah, I want you to explain if you could throw some light on what would be the structures of the lived experiences by giving an example, because I'm not exactly getting confused between the horizons and the structure of lived experiences.
Yeah. So I have not here used the lived experiences, which will more like in Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty will come. But of course, that is the larger category. So you are right. So structure of, so if you I correctly, so you mean to say I have to differentiate between the structure of experience and horizon of experience.
Yes, yes, yes.
So, actually, what Husserl want to say in the very simple that that whenever we are experiencing the word is not chaotic. Word is not something which is unpredictable. The fact that I am able to come in this discussion room because I know when I will open the door, I will find a desk and the chair to sit on. I don't expect that I will open and then I will find an ocean inside the room. So this is not there. So why this is happening? Because there is a structure in the experience. There is a predictability in the experience. Now, what is the source of this predictability? People say, okay, the source of some of the like realist or the externalist say, okay, the source of this predictability is in the word because the things are out there, hence we are experiencing it. But phenomenologists or the conceptualists say that this predictability, this order in the word is made available or made possible by our conceptual categories and our the structure which is provided by the consciousness. Hence, the consciousness becomes central and the interesting and important topic for them to analyze. So that is there what I mean by the structure of experience. Second, horizon of the experience. Horizon, the same thing is that. For example, we always see the things in a horizon. For example, if I see if I see a kind of any object, so only in the background I am able to perceive it. This is the background only which will say, okay, this is looking larger or the smaller, it is the near and the far. So this is the background which gives us the horizon to experience. My background also provide me a horizon. Suppose if I'm a very tense, the same crowd will, I'm in a hurry and I want to go to say to the airport, and then the same crowd will feel like an obstacle to me. While when I am the free, I will enjoy the crowd. So this is my background, which gives me a perspective on the world. So this perspective is called as the horizon. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Nijamatullah has a question. Nijamatullah, are you here? How will we establish the bridge between a different life world and also if the power structure is unequal?
Okay. So this is like interesting Foucauldian question. So the thing is that life word, because here first of all we are dealing with the fundamental life word. Okay, what is the life word? What is actually how the life word plays the role in the experiencing of the word. Now, if the question comes that if there are the different life word and how the power structure is like unequal. So this is this is the problem, more the political problem, which is the problem of like the communication, translation, intersubjectivity. So I don't think the phenomenology kind of have the answer, because phenomenology doesn't deal with the power, which is of course the Foucauldian question, because Foucault, Habermas, all this deals with the question of the power structure. So, so I think if I have to at all answer this question, I don't know I'm qualified to that, but I think Husserl says that despite of the difference in the life word, there is something which binds us, like the body, embodiment, the ability, intersubjectivity. That is why there is a possibility of the dialogue and the possibility of engaging with that. So that can be an ad hoc answer to this question.
Okay, sir.
Now we'll move to Sophia Hamid's question. Also, this is an interactive session, so if you all want to like switch on your videos and then speak, that is also great.
Yeah, that would be great.
Do you want to ask your question? Niharika, is she here?
Trying to unmute her.
Okay, then meanwhile, is she here? Okay, so we'll just take the question. How does one talk about the phenomenological experience of something when language we can resort to explain it as itself borrowed from the life world?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this question shows the problem that suppose how can you do the justice with the phenomenological experience? Because whenever one has to explain the phenomenological experience, one will be again depend on the intersubjective language, and which is of the community. And then how can you justify how can you justify the subjective account of the experience? So there can be the two answers to that. First answer is that suppose if we are talking about, like in the Husserl sense, about some objects. So if there is a validation of my experience, if my experience is validated by the intersubjective community, then this experience gets validated and I feel that I am not hallucinating. So for the ordinary kind of the object of the going about in the world, this can happen in that way. But suppose if there is something which is very experiential, So I think that is why the poetry and the literature is important, which says something about the word which cannot be totally exhausted in the language which is in the life word. That is why the poetry literature always add on to the language, because they experience something which is the primordial ground, which is very primal, and the language always tries to come into terms with this primal experience.
The next question is also related, I think. It's also about language and expression. So can we say that our embodied experience plays a major role in why certain words and expressions emerge in language? This is Bilal Ahmed.
Yeah, hi Bilal. So the thing is that, yeah, this is uh, that I'm not sure that because this, I think, linguistics can answer this question, that why the certain kind of the word and certain kind of the expression only emerge in the embodied experiences. So I'm not sure to answer this question. Of course, there can be some basic commonality in such particular kind of the experiences, but I don't think phenomenologically we can exalt that, because there are different life, different kind of the people experiences, and there are the different expressions. So there is a difference also. Of course, there is a commonality. Some what Wittgenstein says, the family resemblance. So there can only be the family resemblance between them, but there cannot be the exact kind of universality in that. This is, I need to think on this question.
We'll take the question from Shine. Can we see you while you ask your question, Shine? Shine, are you here?
Yeah, hi.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So I was asking about on the basis of the tools and methods itself. I mean, if I want to study the life worlds of people in certain area who are experiencing certain disaster, suppose flood, and so with what tools and methods can I understand their life worlds? And secondly, I mean, if I want to characterize that life world, what kind of themes should I look into? That's my question.
Thanks for this question, Sam. So that is what we try to do in this class, that what are the actually the themes which can be looked into the life world. So that is why subjectivity, aboutness of the consciousness, first person experience, these are the some background experiences, intersubjectivity, embodiment, all this constitute the life world. So life world is not only about the community, but also about my personal experiences, time consciousness. So suppose of the people who are, as you say, the life world of the people are shaped, who are recurring floods, who are encountering the recurring flood. So that is, so I think as we do in the qualitative research, we will take their interviews, we see the various interviews, narratives of that, and see how they are like expressing the things, experiencing these floods in the particular way, and we see what kind of the convergences in their expression. So I think that is the only through the qualitative, when we qualitative analysis of these kind of the narrative, then only there's some pattern can emerge, which will give us a leeway into their life world, because very difficult to, because there are different life worlds and different people relate in the different way, but there is something which will connect that, right? Like the people who suffer, who like, who live in the constant, some of the minority people who remain in the constant fear of like of the communal right. So their expression, some of their the kind of the convergence and some kind of the shareability in their particular experiences and the responses which people register. Like if you can see the works of the Veena Das in sociology. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we have a question from Dr. Shirish. Sir, would you like to ask your question? It's slightly large in scope. So, Dr. Shirish.
Okay. So
I'll just read it then, sir. Can you please discuss phenomenology and the difference between the Anglo-American philosophy and Am I audible?
no, you were not audible. Can you?
Okay. Yeah, I'll repeat it. Can you please discuss phenomenology and the difference between the Anglo-American philosophy and continental philosophy, and how these two camps are different from each other, and situate phenomenology in their differences?
Okay, so this, as Meera has suggested, this has a very broad scope and very difficult to in the very singular, but some of the important points I would like to highlight. First, now they are no longer still camps in the sense, because after the philosophy of mind, like phenomenology and the analytical philosophy, both are like sharing, or like in the work of the Javi, Strawson, and all other people. So lot of there are the convergences in that. So now there is not like they are paying for each other's bloods unlike earlier. So, but still, what is like the main difference between the continental and the Anglo-American philosophy? This is a debatable topic, but one thing is very that Anglo-American philosophy is kind of they are very they are marked by the linguistic turn in the philosophy, like that the realities actually can be coded into the language in the so the semantics of the words can actually give us access to the structure of the consciousness of the external world. While continental philosophy, they have the said that there is a primacy of the experiences. So there is something primacy of the experience which cannot be exhausted through the language, and you have to use kind of the literary metaphors in order to account for this multitude of the experiences. So the best way to see this contrast in the works of the Russell and the Nietzsche. While the Russell says that languages have to be the mathematically written, while Nietzsche says that you have to go back to the tragedy, Greek theater, and all that, so that you can account for the self or the conscious experience per se. So this is what I can say right now.
Thank you, sir. We'll take the question from Beata. I saw her a little earlier. Is she here, Beata?
Hello.
Yeah, hi, Beata.
Okay, hi. Thank you for this, again, very clear, amazingly clear lecture. And I don't know, my question is maybe a bit stupid, but somehow I wonder what is the relationship of what Husserl talks about as consciousness to the mind, and somehow can you comment on the relationship between mind and body in Husserl's thought, and is it dualistic? Is it how can we understand this? So yeah.
Thank you, Beata, for this question. This is actually one of the problem, actually, one of the difficult problem in the history of philosophy, this mind-body duality. It is claimed that Husserl overcomes it because unlike Descartes, he doesn't differentiate, doesn't divide the word, because for Descartes, body has the side of the extension and mind is the thought. While Husserl says that whenever we think of the consciousness, so there is no inner chamber of the consciousness that you can go back into the consciousness and enjoy kind of the mental theater. For him, whenever we think of the consciousness, it always has the word directedness. It always remains related to the word. So even I think you can also throw light on that. Whenever we talk about the pain or the trauma, so according to phenomenology, that can always be also kind of explained in the physical terms also. Whenever I talk about the good, bad mood, so this is not something which is only happening in the mind. Bad mood also constitutes like that I'm not able to work, do my work properly, to sit in my chair properly, the work doesn't look the same. So this is kind of a, so phenomenology tries to overcome this mind-body divide.
Thank you.
Okay, now we will take Shalu Luko's question, and may I please request all the questions regarding reading material and such, please feel free to email Saurabh sir, so that'll be helpful for him and easier for him to respond to you as well. But I'll take the first part of the question. How can we apply phenomenology and intersubjectivity in literary research?
Yeah, so this is interesting. I could see the smile on the face of Meera, because she's also from the literature. So this is actually like like interesting thing is that in as you all know that who are doing in the English language is literary criticism. So literature is actually whenever we talk about the literature or the literary characters, they give us a view on the word. What is their perception of the word, perception of the event and the thing. So now phenomenology is helpful because phenomenology, unlike sciences, it doesn't give the third person perspective. It gives a subjective lived experience, how the particular person who subjectively lived that experience is trying to explain it from the experiential point of view. And I think the most of the people who write the literature and who writes about the literary theory, so they give the first person account. How do they experience it? And that's what we have discussed. This is not that this is only subjective, their personal experience, because there is a grain of the truth in that. So how the subject is looking at it. So I think this would be the interesting if we see the relationship between, in the literature, we see the relationship between the experience and the truth. That this is not only about my experience, but this is the truth. There is some perspective on the world. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now we'll take Pratyush's question. Pratyush? His question is about how we can apply phenomenology to third-person observation, whether we can, and with respect to non-human conscious beings.
Okay. So the thing is that as you know, the method of the phenomenology is the first person point of view from the experiential point of view. So, so it would be the category mistake to think that it can be analyzed from that it will become a third person observation. But interesting thing is that suppose with the AI things or the automats, how the phenomenology is applied. So as I think we have discussed earlier also with you that Dreyfus, and there is a lot of phenomenological critique of the Dreyfus and the phenomenologists of the non-conscious being. That because these non-conscious beings would be like a zombie. They can perfectly imitate the behavior. That is like the perfect behaviorism is there. So if I pinch so in a non-AI or perfectly like I don't know if you have seen this movie called The Blade Runner. So replica, they would be perfect replica. If you pinch it, they can have every kind of the experience and the responses. But the qualia of the first person perspective, they don't have. This is actually what distinguishes the phenomenology.
We'll take the question from Bansidhar Deep. Bansidhar, can we hear from you? No, okay. What is the basic departure from transcendental phenomenology to understand consciousness and in the context of life, which Husserl talks about in the later part?
Okay, so this actually this departure is already like you can see the hints of it. You can see in the Cartesian meditation, because when Husserl started in the ideas, so the transcendental phenomenology, because he was born like a Kantian, because he used the word called ego pole. There is a ego pole, and that it makes sense of the word. So it is called as the constituting phenomenology, that how the consciousness or subject is constituting the word. Now, in the later part, he realized that this consciousness or this self is also constituted by the variety of the experience, like the background experiences of the time, of the culture, of other people, right? In fact, some of the people also use this, like Paul Ricoeur try to use, but I'm not sure that how much it will go into the Husserl's framework. Even the unconscious of like Freud. So these, but of course Husserl doesn't take it. So this background experience actually make kind of this constitutes the ego. So this is called as the difference between the constituting and the constituted phenomenology, between the static and the genetic phenomenology. So more on it you can see in the Cartesian meditation, and of course in the Crisis of the European Science it has come the full-fledged. Yeah.
Now we have a question from Anushri Gokhale. Anushri?
Hello, I hope I'm audible. So
Yes,
I'm
yes.
not a student of philosophy, so I'm still taking some time to understand it. So I just had a thought. I had read something about Gestalt approach. So my question is the act of perception similar to the approach of Gestalt, which argues that when we see the small pieces, we tend to construct the whole based on our previous experiences. So are these similar or are they completely different?
Yeah. Thank you, Anishri, for this question. In fact, there is a lot of similarity. In fact, phenomenologists, especially like Merleau-Ponty and other phenomenologists, they actually uses the Gestalt approach in order to problematize the empiricism, because there is a one method, there is a one school of thought which believe that the perception is basically empirical in nature, because there are the things out there and our mind is passive, it just catch the image. So by using the Gestalt approach, they show that our background also shows, because there are some optical illusions also, so that our background and the background of the things also plays a role in the perception. So yeah, of course, they uses the Gestalt approach and of course radicalize it and uses the like embodiment and other things also.
So Rishali is also asking, is this structure same as schema that cognitive psychology talks about?
Yeah, I'm not aware about the cognitive psychology, that what is actually the content of the cognitive psychology, but the fundamental thing is that in phenomenology they use a lot of the cognitive sciences, but basically when they talk about the perception, so they uses that it is not only uses our background experiences, our embodied experiences. So all this take this play a role in understanding the perception of the thing. And like a famous like a neuroscientist who uses phenomenology and embodiment, Francis Varela, so he also uses this approach. So I think lot of actually there is a convergence between the cognitive sciences and phenomenology currently.
Okay, so next week, Suja Swaminathan's question. Is she here, Suja? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. My question was that is it possible that mental health issues are a problem of consciousness and disruption of consciousness projecting itself onto the external world, whether it is real or whether it is imagined? Is there a connection, and does phenomenology itself deal with this issue directly or indirectly?
Yeah, this is very good question. Actually, I agree with this question, because this especially mental health issues, or this is actually especially in Merleau-Ponty, it is more pronounced, especially the experience of the phantom limb and all that, that there is a disruption of the projection on the world because of some as you talked about the mental health issue, because of some issue that this perception, like there are for example, there are certain kind of the cognitive problems in which person was not able to project the future. He cannot remember the past more than 1 year or like a few minutes. So that is why he is not able to project the future. So we can also think that this disrupts the structure of the consciousness. So that is why person is not able to go about in the world. Now the question is, does phenomenology answer this? No, because phenomenologists are mainly dealing with the structure of the consciousness, not over the mental health issue. But of course, Heidegger discusses it many times in the experience of the anxiety, and others. Sartre also discussed in the experience of the nausea. So this is a lot of like the mental, like the this medical doctor who wrote on this existential psychotherapy, I think Boss. He has also lot of the convergence between the phenomenology and the mental health actually. So that because they believe that the phenomenology gives us a better paradigm to understand the being in the word and to the mental health issue. So this is a very fertile and interesting area. So this is actually people, some of people are currently working on.
Thank you.
Before we move to the next question, I think Rishali wanted to say something. Niharika, could you please unmute her so that we can just hear from her?
Hello, thank you so much, ma'am, for unmuting me. Sir, I had asked a question about, in particularly with reference to Shaw Piaget, in his cognitive theory, where he talks about schema and he also talks about accommodation and adaptation, accumulation, sorry. So where he is talking about a child, infant trying to understand things around the world and how the child adapts to the new information that he or she receives from the significant others. So that reminded me of Shaw Piaget's theory. So am I right in comparing the two theories?
Yeah. In the but we have to also like one difference I find with Piaget was very much influenced by the Kant's philosophy, especially Kant's critique of pure reason, that how our concepts play a lot of role in structuring the world. So, so Piaget also used this with the children, that how child psychology develops, how this background experiences, how this our cognitive capacities actually shape the world. But I'm not sure, because I have not read that Piaget, but I am not sure that how in Piaget, because Piaget was more in the conceptual mode, I don't think he uses that much that I may be wrong, so you can correct me. But as far as little I have read about it, that the embodiment doesn't come that much radically. That embodiment is the ground of our making sense of the world. Like right now in the morning, we were discussing that when the child learns to grasp the things, so this grasp of the thing, actually he is grasping some object, grasping the ball. So how this grasp actually shows that there is a trust in the world. So how does it come actually? So I think these kind of the questions, like some of the questions of the embodiment and of the background structures are not that much in Piaget, but of course, as a conceptualist, he would agree. He is in the same schema. So I think in phenomenology, we can like make the amalgamation of like this conceptual approach as well as the embodied approach towards the making sense of the world. So that's what I have in the mind, but I would of course learn to more from you, because I am not that much rooted in Piaget.
No, actually, I am also from philosophy background, sir, but I teach psychology as well. And even I am into the learning mode. So thank you so much for answering my question, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So now we'll take Paul Sakriya's question. Paul, are you here to ask your question? Okay. Okay, I'll just read it. Does phenomenology suggest an impossibility in understanding the other? Can we relate this to the idea of the other in Levinas?
So yeah, so this is the so Levinas actually comes up with the idea of the other, by which he criticized Husserl, because especially Husserl's fifth Cartesian meditation, in which Husserl says that I see other. What is this actually? Husserl differentiates between the problem that how the experience of other is possible. The way I experience the object and the way I experience the other human being is different. Because when I see the other person, he gives the example of pairing. I immediately know that he is a human person like me. So he says how it happens. He says, I feel the other as an analog me. He's just like me. Now, Levinas' critique is that by doing this, what is Husserl is doing? He's actually objectifying the other. He's exalting the other. Because he's just like me, so he's not different from me. So his otherness, difference is something is like hijacked, and the other doesn't become the source of mystery. So which for Levinas is the source of the ethics. When other become the mystery, then where the ethics come. But there is also critique of Levinas on this aspect by Derrida, Jacques Derrida. He says Husserl doesn't mean that, because for Husserl the other or any object, because we only have the perspective on an object or another. If I see from the other angle, he would look different. So any other object of representation is never exhausted by the perception. So it will always can be modified with each new act of the perception. So on the basis of it, like Derrida criticized Levinas. So there is nothing, because I think, as you are aware of, there are still so many debates are going on this between the Husserl, Derrida and Levinas. So you can follow these debates.
I'll take the last question, which is from Nijamatullah. Do you want to ask it here? It's just to elaborate on intersubjectivity.
Yeah, so the question of the intersubjectivity, like in Husserl, again we can understand with the question of with the unpercept, with the example of perception. So Husserl says that when I see the object, so at that time there are some background of the object which I am not seeing. So he gives another example. He says, I know that if the person who is on that side, he could see the object in the same way if I move around, right? So if there is some, if there is an object and I'm talking to some person, so I know that he's also seeing the something just like me only, as I am seeing. So this means our self is not like a monastic or like a solipsistic self, but it is an intersubjective in its basis. It is always structured, it is intersubjective. So this is what Sartre also says, just for a moment. Sartre says that when I am alone, so at that time I think the word is alone for me. Like I'm in this room and I'm alone for me. And suppose if the Niharika comes in this room and sees other object. So this disturbs me. Why? Because I know she also because she has created another point of the reference. Now, because I know the other person has another point of the reference on the same thing as I have. So this is the intersubjectivity. While if there are the object around, so I know I can fashion my word. This object doesn't have any point of the reference. But when some other person come, he will have the different reference point of reference in the word. So in this way, according to Sartre, I'm always remain with the other. Other is always in my consciousness. Even if I live alone like Robinson Crusoe, but other would always in my consciousness.
We have just one more question, sir. Shall we take it?
Yeah, there is some, she's Vrishali Gupte, kindly.
She.
Okay, she asked already.
Yeah. So we'll take Arjun's question.
Okay, fine.
Hi. Hi, Professor. Good evening. Can you please elaborate on Husserl's one life world? Because I couldn't differentiate that from the realist claim of a world out there. So is it not something similar, or how is it different?
Okay, so I have this Husserl doesn't call the one life word because he uses German word Lebenswelt or life word. Okay, but still the question is that how the life word has to be differentiated between the realist notion of the word as out there. Okay, so the thing is that when realist talks about the word, that the word is out there. So according to like conceptually, there is a kind of the fundamental problem in there, because when we say the word out there, so this means we are conceptualizing the word and using the language and the categories which is actually acquired by the linguistic practices or our being in the world, our linguistic practices or from our society, from our culture and the society. So even the discussion on that, there is the reality that makes sense in the scientific or in the everyday discourse. So there is nothing would be the question of the reality or the causality outside of our embodiment in the world. So that is why, like even the analytical philosophers like Davidson and all that say that actually we have there is a conceptual schema which gives us access to the world. But that doesn't mean the phenomenologists are saying that word is actually not there, it is all in my head. They are also not saying that. So they say the word is actually something, there is a view from somewhere. This is actually my embodiment my situatedness in the word, that give me access to the word. So the word is not something objectively. That is why there can be the multiple perspective on the word. And the life word is something that which giving me the perspective on the word, particular perspective on the word is shaped by my community, culture, and my background experiences. So this gives me a leeway, kind of a latch on to the word on the basis of these experiences. So this is actually, they differentiate between the life word and the real kind of the word. Okay.
Thank you, sir. So now if we have more questions, we will take it up on WhatsApp group. And I will just, for those of you who are asking for feedback link, we will provide it in the end of the course. And if there is anything particular or specific that you urgently communicate, please feel free to text me. My number and email ID are all available there. Now I'll just the readings for the next class. And if it is not clear, don't worry, we'll again put it up in the WhatsApp group. So for the next class, we would like you to read Heidegger's Being and Times, selected sessions, translated by John Stambach. So the sections are 9, and then from 12 to 16, that is 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, and then 40. So this is the mandatory reading. And the suggested reading is What is Metaphysics in Basic Writings, also by Heidegger. So if you don't have the time to complete the suggested readings, that is completely okay. Please take your time to complete it. But please do read the mandatory list. So yeah, that will be all. We'll be putting all the details again in the WhatsApp group. So yeah, that will be all. Thank you, Saurabh sir. And would you like to say something, sir?
Yeah, sorry.
Would you like to say something more?
No, that's it. Thank you all for your time and patience.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Niharika, Ashwini, and Abhishek for making this possible. And thank you, all of you. We will see you for the next class, which is titled, What is the Relationship Between Consciousness and the World? A Study of Heidegger's Being and Time. So please do participate. Yeah.